And the ego makes the present moment into an enemy.
All right.
Now, can you see how insane that is? You make the present moment into your enemy because that's all you ever have. That means you make your whole life into an enemy because your whole life is the present moment. When people use the term ego, they interpret it in different ways. Then there's the egos that's used by Freud, the Freudian ego and other egos. But when I use the term ego, or when it's used in a spiritual context, ego simply means complete identification with your mind, with the thinking, the mental emotional makeup of you. That's ego is complete identification with that. And so that's so deeply ingrained. Every human being inherits that kind of dysfunction. And so it's so hard to let go because it's so deeply ingrained by the conditioning of your mind. And so some people need an enormous amount of suffering. And even with that, some people don't awaken even then. They be unhappy until they die. They die even at an early age because the body can't stand the unhappiness anymore. It isn't functioning properly anymore because their mental state interferes with the otherwise harmonious functioning of the body. So they make themselves ill through stress. So we are faced with, it's an enormous, it's also it's a challenging and wonderful thing to realize that your purpose here, beyond any purpose that you might have on a personal level, which also has a function, but your deeper purpose is to evolve as a conscious being and to go beyond the ego here, so that consciousness evolves. Because you're an expression of universal consciousness, and universal consciousness throughout the universe is awakening. We live in an awakening universe, so gradually life forms, in our case the human life form, begins to awaken into a higher level of consciousness.
Yes.
So the essence here is realizing the possibility of living in a different state of consciousness where you're not necessarily always immediately thinking and interpreting things.
What you need to be aware of and then take action on in order to start working towards inner peace and harmony?
Right. Yes, good question. Well, a good entry point is the present moment. The present moment is I sometimes call it the portal into that state of consciousness that we call presence or awareness. The egoic mind, as I call it, the egoic mind is not really interested in the present moment, and it usually tries to obscure the present moment. It's interested in some other imagined moment, but not
the past, the future, worry, doubt. Yeah.
Yes, it ignores the present moment, but the first realization is the absolute importance of the present moment in your life. It's the foundation for everything. Your relationship to the present moment determines how the future evolves, what we call future, which, by the way, never arrives, because when it arrives, it's again the present moment. The realization that all you ever have, all that you can ever experience, is intrinsically linked with the present moment. It's inseparable from the present moment. Your entire life unfolds in and as the present moment. That's all there ever is. The past, when the past happened, it was the present moment. It couldn't happen anywhere else. And when you remember the past, you remember it in the present moment. Future, when the future comes, when tomorrow comes, it won't be tomorrow anymore. It will be the now. Tomorrow actually never comes. Of course, we need to make plans on a practical level. The future is indispensable. We need it future for us to get together here to talk, stipulate day and time for connecting. So on a practical level, we cannot do without future. But on a deeper level, on the deeper psychological level, it's important to realize that the future as such does not actually exist, because all you can ever experience or have is the present moment. Begins with the realization of the absolute primary importance of the present moment. This is all you ever have. So you might as well have a good relationship with the present moment, because if your relationship with the present moment is dysfunctional, your entire life is dysfunctional. Psychological pain that's there is, again, problematic on some level, whether it's financial or relationship or work situation or living situation. It's very, or health situation. It's very likely that at any given time, your life situation will be problematic on at least one of these levels.
Right.
And sometimes it's not one, it's 2 or 3 or 4, it becomes really problematical. You lose all your money, you lose your job, your wife leaves you, or you lose your home. These things do sometimes happen.
Yes.
So you have that. These life challenges, situational challenges, are usually perceived as being part of the present moment, but they're not really the present moment. They are what I call your life situation. But other than your life situation, you have something that I call your life. Life situation exists in time. Life is now, and never not now. And since your life is now, you have to ask yourself, yes, I have all these problems. I don't know how I'm going to pay the rent, maybe, or my relationship is problem. I'm in the middle of divorce proceedings, all these things that happen to people. Or I've just been let go, my company has collapsed, or whatever, or it might collapse. Maybe it's doing well, but it may not do well next year. All kinds of things that are perceived as problematic, which sometimes are real, and sometimes are just imagination. That again, we need to differentiate between when people say they're having big problems. Sometimes they are just in the mind because they think of things that might go wrong. At other times, there are actually real challenges happening around you.
Right.
But here again, it's to single out the present moment, not to ignore action that you might take or have to take in order to change certain situations. Is there any action that I can take? That's a secondary question. It's important, but it's secondary. Primary question, I often ask people, what problem do you have at this moment? And then they usually start by saying, well, I'm running out of money, or I'm living in this unpleasant, this place, whatever. I say, no, running out of money is not this moment, right here and now. What problem do you have here and now? In this moment, then you look around. Maybe you become aware of that you're breathing, and you look around, and then you reluctantly sometimes people have to admit, well, okay, I'm ready to admit that at just this moment there isn't actually a problem. The next one there might be, but the next one at this moment you may have a challenge that you immediately need to deal with. You're going for a walk and if you encounter a bear, that is not a problem, it's a challenge, and you deal with it. Either you run away or you don't, whatever you do, you deal with it. The problem lives in the mind. To get out of that is to give much more attention to the present moment. Any problem you have cannot survive in the present moment, because problem is a burden that you carry in your mind, your mental emotional field. That's what a problem is. The rest is situations and circumstances. Either you act or you don't act. And if you don't act, you take your attention into the present moment and see that it's actually okay. But if no action is possible, then you come to a place of surrender. But it's positive surrender, not negative surrender. Positive surrender is an uncompromising yes to the present moment. An uncompromising yes to what is. That is a place of great inner power that arises with, yes, this is what is. That's the starting point. So you're not arguing with the isness of things, because that's insane. You cannot argue with what is. Amplifies the ego, the egoic consciousness. The ego loves to argue with what is. It needs to. It loves enemies. And the ego makes the present moment into an enemy.
All right.
Now, can you see how insane that is? To make the present moment into your enemy, because that's all you ever have. That means you make your whole life into an enemy, because your whole life is the present moment.
Right.
So I sometimes make the present moment your friend, not your enemy. Make the present moment your friend. then your whole life begins to change. Because what we call future is just an extension of your state of consciousness in the present moment. So if your state of consciousness is negative, it is very likely that you will experience much more negativity in the so-called future. The present moment, if you're in the present moment, you're in a place of acceptance, of positive acceptance, then it's very likely that the so-called future, I always say so-called future because the future as such doesn't exist. It's always, when it comes, it's a now.
Yes.
So the so-called future reflects your state of consciousness in the present moment. So that's really a very important realization. So that is how the absolute importance of your state of consciousness here and now. What is your state of consciousness now? Rather than thinking that something else is more important than my state of consciousness. So in any situation, you're faced with any situation, what is the state of consciousness with which you face the situation? Are you in a state of resistance or negativity towards the situation? Because obstacles come in many forms, sometimes in the form of human beings who don't like you to do what you're doing. So how do you face an obstacle? What is your state of consciousness when an obstacle arises? Do you immediately become angry? Do you become despondent? Or do you start complaining in your mind about people and talking about others, how awful this situation is, and complaining? Or are you able to just immediately say, this is what it is? So you face the obstacle, not in a state of resistance, come from a state of power. This is what is. And then when you're in that state of presence, very often a right action arises spontaneously. Then you find yourself doing the right thing because you're not making the situation into an enemy. This is very important, and a huge obstacle for people is to start complaining and building up stress when things go wrong. In other words, things shouldn't be happening. So they become negative. They become unpleasant. They become unpleasant to people, colleagues and people they work with. And a lot of negative energy can build up in a company and so on. Some of the most effective people in this world, there are perhaps a few, they don't work with negativity. They work immediately with a positive attitude. They don't make the present moment into an enemy. They might never have heard any spiritual teaching, so perhaps that is some kind of innate wisdom that they have, or maybe they've learned this lesson in a past lifetime, who knows. So the important is always start with the present moment, the power of now, power of the present moment. So which is the power of consciousness itself, beyond the ego. How powerful. The ego is only like the moon reflects the light of the sun, and the ego reflects the light of consciousness. It's not power. There's no power in ego itself in the same way that there's no light in the moon. It's just reflected light.